The Young Lords were a radical group founded by Puerto Ricans modeled on the Black Panther Party. They drove out the administrative staff of the hospital, barricaded the entrances, made their cries for decent health care known to the world. This is the trailer to the film Takeover.
This is a story from New York. Not the New York of Manhattan and Broadway, but from perhaps the toughest square mile in the city, in the South Bronx.
I was 14 years old when I joined the Young Lords.
The Young Lords were a street gang that became politicized by the Black Panther Party.
We became visible as servants of the people.
One of our targets was Lincoln Hospital.
That building was condemned 25 years ago. Condemned for rich people and opened up for poor people.
It was a place that you went to die.
Lincoln was called the butcher shop.
Blood stains on the walls, blood stains on the floors.
And there was a rat in the emergency room.
We have seen children get lead poisoning while hospitalized at Lincoln Hospital.
So we felt now is the time for us to say exactly how we're going to respond to the killings of our people.
Our plan was to take over Lincoln Hospital.
We have to begin to stand up as the people, the Puerto Rican people, and say that's enough. That's enough.
We have been asking for changes to take place, and you've paid no attention to us. You've thrown us out of your offices, and you've called the cops on us. And now we're putting you out. You've taken over a hospital. We're going to run it. You're out. And I will walk you to your car.
We immediately announced that we were not leaving until the city made a firm commitment to build a new hospital.
From El Barrio to Arecibo, Palante.
About 1,000 policemen on roofs with high-powered rifles. They had vans all over the place.
If the police came in, it was going to be a bloodbath because the police hated the Young Lords.
We were terrified.
To all who had to hide, I say, Palante.
Power to the people means including people to gain control of their destiny.
The Young Lords were ahead of our time in terms of recognizing that healthcare is a right.
We wanted a revolutionary change to the health system in this country, and we still do.
Because no oppressor is invincible.
third and last event in this year's Justice Forum, and we're very excited very happy to welcome here Emma Francis Snyder, whose film documentary on the Young Lords we're going to watch and then discuss, and also Massimo Colon, who is somewhere around here, who's where is it? Hi, Massimo, who's a wonderful photo exhibit from the time of the Young Lords, of the movements that website to Maximus. We have a link to Maximus website so that you can all go on Maximus website and see the photographs. They're spectacular. We praise your good sense.
Thank you. I know it's the right thing to do, but it is sad missing out being in person, for sure.
Thank you. So there's a specific question about the production process, and I wanted to ask you if you would explain to us this three-pronged approach that you have in the film. So you have archival material, you have reenactments, and then you have the interviews with the.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm happy to I'm happy that I can participate on Zoom, but I am sad to be missing you guys in person. So the film, as Carlito can attest to, I've been working on for about 10 years, or I did, or was, now he's done, so it's finished. But so I've been an activist for most of my life, and I've participated in various forms of direct action, whether it's like protest or occupations. And there was one particular action that I was part of that when, I'd say terribly wrong, we had attempted to take over the president's office, and they knew that we were coming, and there were a number of peace officers. Sorry, when I say president's office, I mean at Brooklyn College, so I was a student, and I was organizing around access to quality higher education. This was in 2012, so the implementation of the increase of tuition that comes to services, and also the spying of Muslim students that was allowed to go on for a very long time on the Brooklyn College campus, which I always want to bring up because that happened. And so we attempted to occupy the president's office, and they shut the doors, and we kind of had a sit-in outside, and then the peace officers got incredibly rowdy and violent. 3 students were arrested, assaulted, and it kind of changed the way that I had thought.
Adriana and Ivan and Carlito have actually prepared.
First I want to say thank you. I'm Puerto Rican. I knew very little about the young lords. I spent most of my life I was born in Puerto Rico, and I grew up in the South Bronx, where I spent most of my life messing up my life. So I was too busy messing up my life to care about anything else. So
Ivan is a JA scholar.
So watching the film made me, even watching it again, it's like the 5th time I've watched it. It makes me super emotional to know that my people, or just people in general, are willing to put so much on the line, their lives, their health, everything, their families, for the upliftment of other people. It just made me super duper emotional, and I just want to say thank you for putting this film together. Thank you to Carlito for your sacrifice, your bravery, your genius. I just think of where I was when I was 20 years old. So I grew up in the South Bronx at this time, the time of the film. And I knew, I played in abandoned buildings, and that was my playground. There were no fancy parks. We played in abandoned buildings and needles and all types of dirt, just craziness. But that's what we had. We made the most of it. And this film really, really resonated with me. But I just wanted to ask, so there was a part in the film where they said that the work of the Young Lords, and either one of you can answer this, is sort of a continuum of work that came before the Young Lords. I just want to know where we are on that continuum now, 2022.
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, it's not a big secret, I'm Puerto Rican. Okay? And that's 101%. because I was willing to throw down my life for Puerto Rico back then, and I'm still willing to put my life on the line for my people. I'm still a young lord. There's a lot that we can romanticize about that event, but we were not aware that our lives were on the line, that the police wanted to kill us, okay? They wanted to kill us before the takeover, but we put ourselves in a position where they really wanted to kill us after the takeover. Because, to put it mildly, we made punks of them, okay? And well, we just unveiled what the truth was, because racist killer cops are nothing but punks, okay? We're the ones, our people, our fighters, our freedom fighters, we're the bad motherfuckers, okay? Because when you repress and suppress and keep a people down, you better prepare yourself for the consequence of that. Because no matter how vicious you are, no matter how many hollow point bullets the police have, no matter what kind of military they have, their greatest weapon is control of our minds. Let's not forget that. And the biggest threat that the young lords posed on the status quo at that time, including our fraternal brothers and sisters, the Black Panther Party, was that we have broken the chain of mental control. You see, and that is what we have to strive for today, because fundamentally, that is the essence of politics. When they're able to control your people with bullshit, okay, the way they are today. And the way they do it is by taking, certain issues and trying to, sell you the sweet-smelling poison that they are feeding us right now as they prepare for another world war. Okay? To speak about the takeover itself, and the film, I like to, always, and give props to Emma, because what she did, she could have been doing something else. She could have been doing a film on Goldilocks, okay? But instead, she chose to make a film of the underdogs. She chose to make a film of those who are not given grandeur by the mainstream. And that is Puerto Rican revolutionaries. So I will always give props to this system, okay? There are many different interpretations of that history, okay? And I want to make that very clear. There are many different interpretations of that history, even amongst many former young lords, okay? I'm the kind who doesn't grow hair in his tongue. So I always, go towards speaking the truth. The Young Lords were basically a communist youth organization. Okay, let me make that very clear. And for those that disagree with me, for those that get uptight and freak out when I say that, just look at the 13-point program of the Young Lords Party. Okay, and you'll find that it is a communistic 13-point program. Just read the pamphlet known as the ideology of the Young Lords, okay, for further proof. You see, and I have to emphasize that, because when there are movements who take actions, you have to explore what are the ideas behind those actions. Looking at the action itself, admiring what we did, that is not enough. You have to go into what are the ideas that went into those actions, because the rise of power, they keep our people oppressed, they keep our homeland colonized, is founded on an idea. It's founded on white supremacy. It's founded on the arrogance of imperialism. Okay, so we must therefore understand what are the conceptions, what are the ideas of liberation. Because unless we grapple with history in that sense, we will never understand what the hell we did back then. Okay? So that is important when we examine history. We need to understand why is it? Why is the 1960s so sexy? It's not about pop culture. It's not about movements that all of a sudden sprung up for no reason. The United States, the ruling class in the United States was in a very vulnerable position. The reason why the Black Panther Party rose up, the Black Power movement rose up, the Puerto Rican masses rose up in Puerto Rico and here in the United States, the Chicano movement, the Native American movement. Why did that happen? The United States was in a potential position for revolution in this country. There was that potential for revolution, and that is the reason why we rose up. And that is the reason why a 14-year-old, that's right, because I joined the Young Lords when I was 14 years old. And there were many others. The average age in the Young Lords was 17. Okay, how is that possible? Because there was a momentum. There was a momentum in the world. There was a momentum in the United States. People of color said enough. Okay, you want to shoot us? We're going to shoot back. We did not, we exerted ourselves in our solemn right to armed self-defense. You shoot us, we shoot back. Okay? And that was part of our 13-point program. Point number 10. We believe in armed self-defense and armed struggle as the only means to liberation. Point number 13 of the 13-point program, we want a socialist society. Point number 5, we want community control of our institutions and land. Point number 1, which continues to be point number 1 in my heart, and that is we want self-determination for Puerto Ricans, liberation on the island and inside of the United States. See, so when we talk about the takeover of Lincoln Hospital, yes, we took it over because of inadequate health care. But let's keep in mind what was at the foundation of that. We were against the genocide of our people and how they use healthcare, the inadequacies of healthcare as the avenue of genocide. At the same time, during that same period, okay, we had learned that 1 out of every 3 Puerto Rican women was secretly sterilized. Okay, that's right. In Puerto Rico and inside of the United States. Lincoln Hospital was secretly sterilizing Puerto Rican women between the ages of 18 to 26. Okay? So when we put that history in the proper context, we have to say that we want a new society. We want a society without capitalism. We want a society where men and women of all races control their own destiny. That's what the takeover of Lincoln Hospital in 1970 was about. Thank you.
Party, what they were fighting against, that is precisely what the Young Lords did, right? I mean, they were fighting against the politics of the United States. I have a question about youth movements, which I think that it's absolutely important the way that you put it, Carlito, because that the 60s, the 70s, that was the time when we went into the movement when we were 15, 16, right? My parents were far more concerned about my going out to demonstrations during the junta in Greece, but not more. Just as much concerned about my going out to demonstrations during the junta as they were about my going out with boys. What is it that the movement is still doing, right? Is the movement still there? What is the movement still doing? I am looking at young people in this room who are shaking their heads approvingly. And I'm thinking about this entirely new movement that has come out. since the event, right? I mean, Black Lives Matter, young kids who went out on Fifth Avenue and they just were in the hundreds of thousands. So these are three things that I would like to accomplish as follows. In today's society, when free speech is as much an illusion as an independent banking system, we're made witness to the rise of a one world order and the stifling of dissent through media control. We're also witnessing people and nation states become pariah for not towing the line. Can there be the emerging as well as the effectiveness of any movement in these times and under these conditions, which is what you are both all talking about, right? What do movements do? Right now, when we have this entire control by capital, by a state which has exceeded its boundaries, what can movements do right now? Anyone? Yeah, there you go.
Well, you would have to, I would ask the question, you go to the cemetery and dig up a corpse and bring them back to life. You can't. The young lords did not come about out of magic. The young lords rose under a certain set of circumstances, socioeconomic and political. And that goes for all social movements. Okay? How do you characterize what the setting was? It was an upsurge. It was a revolutionary upsurge in the United States. We were destroyed. They pitted us against each other. Okay? And it was a violent end. Okay? There was nothing romantic about that. Where young lords used violence against young lords. The same way the Black Panther Party was destroyed. However, that does not mean that the violence that the state perpetuates inside of the movement is an absolute. We can develop the organizational and political sophistication to prevent that from happening. And it has happened in many experiences around the world where the status quo has infiltrated the progressive movement and has tried to stir itself, create internal conflicts within those movements. That was tried in the Cuban Revolution. That was tried in the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution. We were like a plane that was crushed before the takeoff. Okay, but there was a potential for revolution in the United States. But what's lacking was the experience. We were kids. We were kids. That, and that is not a lie. Many of us were underage. Okay, but nevertheless, and there was the potential for it, and it wasn't just the young lords that existed. Okay, in the Puerto Rican left, there were numerous other organizations. Because it was, the young lords were really a culmination of an experience of a community, and that was the Puerto Rican community. There were other organizations that sprung up. People were actually exploring ways to resolve old issues like the internal racial contradictions within the Latino community. Some of the anti-black sentiments that have been instilled by oppression in the Latino community, that was addressed. The homophobia, in the young lords, we had a gay and lesbian, LGBT, caucus, the question of women, there were many questions that were raised that we discussed in our mandatory studies. There were groups like, going back to the entities, the experience, the collective experience of the Puerto Rican community. There were groups like El Comité, groups like Resistencia Puertorriqueña, the PRSU, the Puerto Rican Students Union, that were in all of the colleges. At that same period, during that same period, there was an influx of Dominicans in the Latino community. That was also being addressed. We had Dominicans and Mexicans and Cubans and whatnot in the Young Lords. 30%, 30 to 40% of the Young Lords were not Puerto Rican. They were of other nationalities, including African Americans. You know, Cleo Silvers was African American. She was not Puerto Rican. Denise Oliver was also African American. You know, there was a growing internationalist consciousness that was developing in that experience. And that's important because, you know, the experience of Puerto Ricans in the United States, we found out, was not identical to that in Puerto Rico. And that's why when we established chapters in Puerto Rico, because eventually we did, it backfired. And that was part of, that mistake was part of or caused our decline. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question,
you did, and I will ask you again. There's a question though, that why is there such a dearth in scholarship on the Young Lords? I mean, there's so much.
It's great to hear Carlito talk about everything he's saying. I think he's absolutely right that the historical moment was unique and particular. However, you know, when I look at the recent activism of healthcare workers in Puerto Rico, nurses, paramedics, and other folks who are working in hospitals and who have recently taken to the streets in protest in Old San Juan, in the calle de la Resistencia, where the summer of 2019 protests happened that removed then Governor Ricardo Rosselló, as well as other sites in protests where, you know, ambulance drivers have complained about extremely low pay and terrible working conditions. I do see that there is an ongoing life of, you know, left protest, even sometimes when people don't necessarily understand themselves as being engaged in leftist activism.
I mean, people will argue against the desire to get rid of the police and prisons, but people very rarely argue against the need for better healthcare, free healthcare, cheaper healthcare. You know what I mean? And so I think that was one of the reasons. And there are there are so many different reasons why I focused on this particular hospital, but that was the biggest thing for me, was just like the healthcare, right? Like that's so few people can argue. And then like you have this, so, you know, if I believe in like community control and community-led institutions, right? I felt like what happened at Lincoln Hospital was a great example. Specifically, this takeover was a great example of that. So you have the workers and the community members represented by the Young Lords and the workers, right? So you have those two, the convergence of that, the health revolutionary unity movement inside the hospital, and then you have who are primarily immigrants, Puerto Rican, Latinx, Black American, African American people, and then you have the doctors or residents who are predominantly white, upper middle class, right? And there's this synergy that happens together, right? And not everybody, and this is always the case, and this is not what I get into in the film, but like not everybody supports this action, right? Nobody will ever always support something, right? But if you can get people to support it, which many of the doctors did, or you know, some, then you have it, whether or not they agreed with what was happening, whether or not they, you know, whatever happened, they were like, cool, some of us will let that happen and follow what you're saying. And that to me, it was like a really beautiful example of collective action across racial, socioeconomic lines inside the hospital, where the community led and like stated what they needed, like all of the, and I will say that some of the most important things that I think some of the demands were, right? Like, obviously free healthcare, but daycares and hospitals, right? Like, have we not seen who is mostly affected by the loss of work or of daycares and schools? Women. Women were predominantly affected by the loss of like childcare or daycare or schooling during COVID-19.
Well, the difference is that the task is different for those agents that are those government agents that are carrying out that operation. Back then, their task was to destroy an existing movement. Today, their task is to prevent one from coming up again. See, and we have to understand that, okay? Because it's going their attempts to prevent a movement from rising up again is going to take on many different forms. They're going to come at us with reforms. They're going to try to seduce us with reforms, and they're going to try to cause internal frictions and confusion with Bojinja. Okay, they have all kinds of weapons, and what's going to repel their attempts is for us to build organizational and political sophistication and understand the new reality that we live under today.
Including Chad, including Francis Manning, Paulo Freire, and so like I've been in constant engagement with this type of dialogue and literature and really action. I started to kind of get political, once like my brother passed away because of incarceration, right? And so this is the reason why I started to get into more this idea of critical consciousness and how it developed for me. So me having these lived experiences and these conditions that go on, I start to notice that there's a lot of like division in this idea of non-profitization, right? Where like I try to help build or contribute to movements, but I notice that funding is a little weird, right? In the background of this organization, or if there's a scholarship or there's some sort of
Killer taste, killer nutrition, always organic. Dave's Killer Bread, bread amplified.